Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Cooper Legacy. Mark Cooper stood in his study, surveying the empire he'd built from nothing. At 42, he commanded a private security firm that handled delicate situations for wealthy clients. Situations that required a man who understood that some problems couldn't be solved through conventional means. His muscular frame and cold gray eyes reflected years of military service before he'd transitioned to civilian work that still demanded absolute precision and zero tolerance for weakness. The Cooper name meant something in their affluent Connecticut neighborhood. Mark had clawed his way up from a childhood in foster homes, where he'd learned early that showing mercy was the fastest way to become someone's victim. Those lessons had served him well in the Army Rangers, and later in building Cooper Security Solutions into a multi-million-dollar operation. Margarita Cooper, née Whitehead, had been the perfect wife for a man of his rising status when they'd married 15 years ago. The daughter of Carol Whitehead, a prominent local judge, she'd brought social connections and an old money pedigree that complemented Mark's growing wealth. Beautiful, refined, and from a respected family, she'd seemed like the ideal partner for a man determined to leave his rough past behind. Their son Tyler, now 13, had inherited his mother's delicate features, but none of her social confidence. The boy was brilliant, already reading at a college level and showing remarkable talent with computers, but painfully shy. Mark had tried to toughen him up through martial arts and outdoor activities, but Margarita consistently undermined these efforts, insisting their son was sensitive and didn't need to be brutalized. The friction had been growing for months. Margarita spent increasingly long hours away from home, claiming charitable commitments and social obligations. When she was home, she seemed distant, distracted. Mark's trained eye had begun noticing the small details: the new clothes, the changed passwords on her devices, the way she startled when he entered a room unexpectedly. But Mark Cooper hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and built a successful business by ignoring his instincts. He'd begun his own quiet investigation, using the resources at his disposal to monitor his wife's activities. What he'd discovered had required every ounce of his military discipline to keep from acting immediately. Margarita was having an affair with Thomas Beck, a smooth-talking real estate developer who'd been circling their social circle for the past year. Beck was everything Mark despised, a man who'd inherited his father's business and coasted on charm rather than competence. Worse, Mark's investigation had revealed that Beck was using inside information from Judge Whitehead to manipulate property deals, and Margarita was serving as the go-between. The betrayal cut deeper than Mark had expected. He'd given Margarita everything: wealth, status, a beautiful home, and his complete trust. In return, she'd not only betrayed their marriage, but had dragged her father into a corruption scheme that could destroy the family's reputation. As Mark reviewed the files spread across his desk, his secure phone buzzed. The caller ID showed one of his operatives. "What do you have, Reese?" Mark answered, recognizing Kenny Reese's number. "Tyler's home from school early," Kenny reported. "Looks upset about something. Margarita's car isn't in the driveway." Mark checked his watch. 3:30 on a Friday. Tyler's birthday party was tomorrow, and Margarita had insisted on planning everything herself. She'd probably used the excuse to meet Beck again. "Keep watching. Report any vehicles," Mark instructed before hanging up. He'd positioned his team strategically around the neighborhood weeks ago, ostensibly for general security, but actually to monitor his family's movements. The irony wasn't lost on him. He protected other people's secrets while his own life was being systematically betrayed. Mark closed the files and locked them in his safe. Tomorrow was Tyler's 13th birthday, and Margarita had planned what she called an intimate gathering of family and friends. Carol Whitehead would be there, playing the role of the distinguished grandfather while hiding his corruption. Thomas Beck had somehow earned an invitation, though Mark hadn't questioned how. What none of them knew was that Mark had spent weeks preparing for tomorrow. The birthday party would indeed be memorable, just not in the way they expected. Chapter 2. The Speech. Saturday afternoon brought unseasonably warm October weather to the Cooper estate. Margarita had transformed their backyard into what she called a sophisticated celebration for Tyler's 13th birthday. White linens, catered food, and enough flowers to stock a funeral home. 20 guests mingled on the manicured lawn, including several of Tyler's classmates who looked uncomfortable in the formal setting. Mark stood near the house, watching the gathering with tactical awareness. Judge Carol Whitehead held court near the bar, regaling a small group with stories from the bench. At 71, the judge remained an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the commanding presence that had intimidated attorneys for 3 decades. What the admirers around him didn't know was that Whitehead had been selling favorable rulings to developers for years, with his daughter serving as the intermediary. Thomas Beck circulated through the crowd with practiced ease, his designer suit and $1,000 smile impressing the other guests. At 38, Beck possessed the kind of effortless charm that made people overlook his lack of substance. He'd built his reputation on inheriting prime real estate from his father, then leveraging corrupt relationships to expand his holdings. Today, he played the role of family friend perfectly, complimenting Margarita on her party planning while exchanging meaningful glances when they thought no one was watching. Margarita herself was radiant in a flowing blue dress that Mark had bought her for their anniversary, an irony that wasn't lost on him. She flitted between guests with desperate energy, ensuring everyone felt welcome while avoiding prolonged eye contact with her husband. At 39, she retained the classical beauty that had first attracted Mark, but he now saw the calculation behind her warm smiles. Tyler sat alone at the head table, picking at his cake while his mother orchestrated the festivities around him. The boy had always been an observer rather than a participant, but today his usual quiet demeanor seemed more troubled than shy. Several times, Mark noticed Tyler watching Beck with an expression that seemed too knowing for a 13-year-old. "Tyler, sweetheart," Margarita called out, clapping her hands for attention. "It's time for you to say a few words to thank everyone for coming." The boy's face went pale. "Mom, I don't want to." "Nonsense," she interrupted, her voice taking on the sharp edge Mark had been hearing more frequently. "You're 13 now. Time to learn how to address a crowd properly." Tyler glanced at his father, who nodded encouragingly. The boy had never been comfortable with public speaking, but Mark believed in facing fears rather than avoiding them. I don't know what to say," Tyler stammered as the guests turned their attention to him. Margarita's smile became strained. "Just thank everyone for coming and talk about what 13 means to you." When Tyler remained frozen in his chair, Margarita's composure cracked. "Speak up, you coward," she snapped, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. "No wonder you have no guts." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Several parents exchanged concerned glances while their children stared at the scene unfolding before them. Mark felt his jaw clench as he watched his wife humiliate their son in front of his friends. Judge Whitehead, perhaps sensing the need to support his daughter's authority, stepped forward with a dismissive wave. "The boy has no backbone," he declared in his courtroom voice. A real disappointment. Mark started toward Tyler, ready to end this public shaming, but his son raised a small hand. "Dad, wait," Tyler said, his voice barely audible. "I've got a special speech for Mom." Something in the boy's tone made Mark pause. Tyler's eyes had changed. Gone was the uncertainty, replaced by a cold clarity that reminded Mark of his own expression when facing an enemy. Tyler stood slowly, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small digital recorder. His hands were steady as he placed it on the table. "I want to thank everyone for coming to my birthday," he began, his voice growing stronger. "Especially Mr. Beck, who's been such a good friend to our family." Thomas Beck raised his wine glass with a practiced smile, but Mark noticed the man's eyes were watching Tyler with new attention. "I've learned a lot about friendship this year," Tyler continued. "Like how some friends visit when Dad's not home, and how some friends have special conversations with Mom in Dad's study." Margarita's face had gone white. "Tyler, that's enough." "I recorded one of those conversations," Tyler said simply, his finger hovering over the play button. "Would you like to hear it?" The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Judge Whitehead's commanding expression had faltered, replaced by something approaching panic. Thomas Beck had gone very still, his charm evaporating as he realized what was happening. "Mom always told me to speak up," Tyler said, his young voice carrying across the frozen gathering. "So here's my speech." He pressed play. Margarita's voice filled the yard, crystal clear through the small speaker. "Thomas, darling, you have to be more careful. Mark's getting suspicious about the property deals." Beck's voice responded. "Your father guarantees the zoning approvals will go through. That's worth the risk." "I know, but if Mark finds out about us, about any of this, he'll destroy us all. You don't know him like I do." As the recording continued, detailing the affair and the corruption scheme, Margarita collapsed into her chair as if her strings had been cut. Judge Whitehead turned pale, his distinguished facade crumbling as he realized his grandson had evidence of his crimes. Thomas Beck bolted. He made it halfway across the lawn before Mark's security team, positioned as catering staff, efficiently blocked his exit. Kinney Reese, wearing a server's uniform, stepped into Beck's path with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Leaving so soon, Mr. Beck?" Mark asked, his voice cutting through the chaos as guests began demanding explanations and parents started gathering their children. "But you haven't heard the end of Tyler's speech." Tyler looked up at his father with eyes that held wisdom far beyond his 13 years. "There's more, Dad. A lot more." Mark nodded, feeling a fierce pride in his son's courage. The boy had inherited more than his mother's features. He'd gotten his father's instinct for warfare. "Then let's hear it all," Mark said quietly. Every word. Chapter 3, The Revelation. The birthday party had devolved into chaos. Parents hustled their children toward the exits while guests who'd hoped for gossip found themselves witnessing something far more serious than social drama. Judge Whitehead sat heavily in a nearby chair, his face ashen as he contemplated the destruction of a carefully built career. Mark stood behind his son, one hand on Tyler's shoulder as the boy continued his recording. The device detailed months of conversations between Margarita and Thomas Beck, each revelation more damaging than the last. Property deals fixed through judicial corruption, zoning laws bent for profit, and through it all, his wife serving as the courier between her father and her lover. "Turn it off," Margarita whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Tyler, think about what you're doing to our family." Tyler looked up at his mother with eyes that held no forgiveness. "You already did that, Mom." The recording revealed the depth of their betrayal, not just the affair, but plans to divorce Mark after securing one final major development deal. They'd intended to clean out his accounts and disappear, leaving him with nothing but the knowledge that he'd been played for a fool. As the last of the guests departed, Mark's security team efficiently secured the property. Thomas Beck sat in a patio chair, flanked by two of Mark's operatives who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate security handbook. The real estate developer's charm had completely evaporated, replaced by the pale fear of a man who realized he'd gravely miscalculated. "How long have you known?" Margarita asked, her voice barely audible. Tyler answered before his father could speak. "I've been watching for 2 months. Mr. Beck's car in our driveway. The way you changed after Dad's business trips. The hushed phone calls." Mark felt another surge of pride in his son's intelligence. The boy had conducted his own surveillance operation, using his computer skills to access security cameras and his natural invisibility to move through the house undetected. "I installed recording software on Dad's study computer," Tyler continued. "Every conversation you had with Mr. Beck was automatically saved to a cloud server." Judge Whitehead finally found his voice. "Tyler, you don't understand what you've done. This will destroy." "Shut up," Mark said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had kept soldiers alive in combat zones. "You're done talking." The judge's mouth snapped closed. For all his courtroom power, Carol Whitehead recognized a predator when he saw one. Mark walked to the patio table and sat across from Thomas Beck. Up close, the developer looked younger than his 38 years, soft around the edges in a way that suggested he'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "You made a mistake, Tom," Mark said conversationally. "You assumed I was some suburban businessman who'd roll over when his wife wanted out. You never bothered to research what I actually do for a living." Beck's eyes darted toward the exits, but Mark's men had positioned themselves with military precision. There was no escape route that didn't go through them. "I protect people's secrets for a living," Mark continued. "I know how to gather information, how to build cases, and how to destroy enemies. It's what I'm good at." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through a series of photographs. "These were taken yesterday. You, meeting with Vincent Torres about the Harbor Point development. Torres works for me, by the way. Has for 6 months. Beck's face went white as Mark showed him clear images of their supposedly secret meeting. "Vincent's been recording every conversation you've had about using Judge Whitehead's influence to fast-track your project approvals. The Harbor Point deal was supposed to be your big score, wasn't it?" The one that would let you and my wife disappear with $50 million. Mark, please, Margarita started, but he cut her off with a look. Every bank account, every shell company, every property you two thought you'd hidden, I know about all of it. I've been building a case against you for months. Tyler stepped forward, holding a tablet computer. Dad, should I show them the offshore accounts? Mark smiled, the expression containing no warmth. Not yet, son. Let's save that for the authorities. Judge Whitehead struggled to his feet. You can't prove anything about the judicial decisions. It's all circumstantial. Audio recordings of you promising favorable rulings in exchange for money aren't circumstantial, Mark interrupted. Neither are the bank deposits that correlate with your court calendar. He gestured to Kenny Reese, who produced a thick folder from his jacket. 2 years of evidence. Every bribe, every fixed decision, every law you bent for profit. Tyler wasn't the only one recording conversations, Judge. You really should be more careful about what you say in public restaurants. The silence stretched as the full scope of Mark's investigation became clear. He hadn't just discovered their betrayal. He'd systematically documented it with the precision of someone who understood how to build an unshakable case. What do you want? Beck asked finally, his voice cracking. Mark stood and walked to his son, placing both hands on Tyler's shoulders. I want you to understand something. Both of you. I don't forgive. I don't forget. And I don't show mercy to people who betray my family. He looked at his wife, seeing her clearly for the first time in months. Margarita, you're done. The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning. You'll get nothing. The prenup you signed covers adultery quite thoroughly. And you, Tom, he turned to Beck, you're going to prison. But not yet. First, you're going to help me with something. Beck swallowed hard. What? Mark's smile was predatory. You're going to learn what happens when someone tries to steal from Mark Cooper. Both of you are. Tyler looked up at his father with unconditional trust. The boy had chosen his side, and he'd chosen correctly. What's the plan, Dad? Mark ruffled his son's hair, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. Justice, Tyler. We're going to give them exactly what they deserve. The birthday party was over, but Mark Cooper's Real celebration was just beginning. Chapter 4, The Trap. 3 weeks after Tyler's birthday revelation, Mark Cooper's revenge machine began its methodical operation. From his home office, he orchestrated a campaign that would have impressed his former military commanders for its precision and psychological warfare elements. Margarita had moved in with her father temporarily, staying in the Whitehead family's colonial mansion while her divorce attorney tried to find loopholes in her ironclad prenuptial agreement. Mark had allowed this arrangement, knowing it would keep his targets concentrated in one location where his surveillance could monitor their every move. Thomas Beck, meanwhile, had attempted to maintain his normal routine, but Mark's invisible pressure was already taking its toll. Property deals mysteriously fell through when key permits were unexpectedly delayed. Financing dried up when banks received anonymous tips about Beck's questionable business practices. The real estate developer was hemorrhaging money, but he didn't yet understand that Mark was controlling every setback. Status report, Mark said into his secure phone, speaking to Felix Bates, one of his most trusted operatives. Beck's meeting with potential investors at the Harbor Club, Felix reported. He's trying to salvage the Ocean View project, but they're getting skittish. Words spreading about his problems. Mark smiled grimly. He'd seeded the rumors himself, using his network of contacts to whisper doubts about Beck's reliability. In the wealthy circles where Beck operated, reputation was everything, and Mark was systematically destroying it. What about the judge? Whitehead's been trying to contact old colleagues, probably looking for advice on damage control. We're monitoring all communications. Mark ended the call and turned to Tyler, who was sitting at his own computer station in the office. The boy had become his father's closest ally, using his technical skills to support the operation. How's our inside access? Mark asked. Tyler's fingers flew across the keyboard. I'm still connected to Grandpa's home network. Mom changed her passwords, but she's using the same patterns she always does. I can see all their emails and messages. The boy's voice held no emotion when referring to his grandfather or mother. Since the birthday party, Tyler had shown remarkable resilience, accepting the situation with a maturity that impressed Mark. The child understood that family loyalty had to be earned, not simply expected. They're planning something, Tyler continued, pointing to his screen. Mom's been researching privacy laws, and Mr. Beck's been looking up legal precedents for thrown-out evidence. Mark leaned over to read the communications Tyler had intercepted. His wife and her lover were becoming desperate, consulting lawyers about their options and discussing ways to discredit the recordings. What they didn't realize was that Mark had far more evidence than they'd heard on Tyler's birthday. "Dad," Tyler asked quietly, "are you really going to send Mom to prison?" Mark considered his response carefully. Tyler was still a child, despite his involvement in exposing the betrayal. "Your mother made choices, son. She chose money over family, chose lies over truth. Actions have consequences." "I know," Tyler said simply. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't going to forgive her like you forgave Grandma when she took money from your wallet that time." Mark remembered the incident. Margarita's mother had been caught stealing cash to feed a gambling addiction. Mark had chosen mercy then, setting up treatment and monitoring rather than prosecution. That kindness had been rewarded with gratitude and changed behavior. This was different. This wasn't addiction or weakness. It was calculated betrayal that would have destroyed everything Mark had built. His phone buzzed with a text from an unlisted number. "We need to talk." Thomas Beck was reaching out, probably hoping to negotiate some kind of deal. Mark smiled as he typed his response. "Riverside Park. 1 hour. Come alone." "Felix," Mark called his operative. "Beck's taking the bait. Position your team, but stay invisible. I want him to think this is a private conversation." Tyler looked up from his computer. "Can I listen in?" "Through the wire," Mark agreed. "But you stay here where it's safe." Riverside Park sat along the Connecticut River, offering privacy for conversations that couldn't happen in public places. Mark arrived early, choosing a bench with clear sightlines and no cover for potential threats. His military training made such precautions automatic, even for what appeared to be a simple meeting. Thomas Beck arrived exactly on time, looking haggard and desperate. The man who'd once commanded rooms with his charm now moved like someone expecting an attack. "Mark," Beck began, sitting carefully on the opposite end of the bench. "Thank you for meeting me. Talk." Beck ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture that would have seemed impossible 3 weeks ago. "This has gone far enough. Whatever you want, money, properties, public apology, name it. But this needs to end." Mark studied the man who'd tried to steal his life. "You think this is about money? Isn't it always?" Beck attempted his old confident smile, but the expression came across as sickly. "Everyone has a price. What's yours?" "You still don't understand what you're dealing with," Mark said quietly. "This isn't a business negotiation. This is war." Beck's composure slipped further. "Look, I know you're angry about Margarita, but marriages end all the time. We can work something out." "You tried to steal $50 million from me," Mark interrupted. "You corrupted a judge. You turned my wife into a criminal. And you did it all while smiling at my dinner table and shaking my hand." The money thing was Margarita's idea. Mark's expression went dead cold. "Don't." Beck fell silent, perhaps finally recognizing that he was sitting next to someone who'd killed people for far less. "Here's what's going to happen," Mark said conversationally. "You're going to transfer every property, every asset, every dollar you have into accounts I designate. You're going to confess to the FBI about the judicial corruption, and you're going to disappear. And if I refuse?" Mark pulled out his phone and showed Beck a photograph. The image showed Beck's elderly mother entering her assisted living facility in Florida. "Your mother seems nice," Mark said. "Shame if something happened to her Medicare funding. Or if the facility discovered she was living there under false pretenses." Beck's face went white. "You can't threaten my mother. She has nothing to do with this." "Neither did my son," Mark replied. "But that didn't stop you from planning to destroy his future for profit." The silence stretched as Beck realized the true scope of his situation. Mark Cooper wasn't just seeking revenge. He was systematically destroying everything Beck valued, using the same merciless efficiency he'd once applied to enemy combatants. "You're insane," Beck whispered. Mark smiled, and Beck suddenly understood why soldiers had followed this man into battle. There was something absolutely certain about Mark Cooper's commitment to victory. 24 hours, Mark said, standing from the bench. "Transfer everything, confess everything, or lose everything. Your choice." As Mark walked away, Beck remained on the bench, staring at the river while his world collapsed around him. In his earpiece, Mark heard Tyler's voice. "Dad? He's calling Mom. Should I listen in?" "Record everything," Mark replied. It's almost time for Phase 2. Chapter 5. The Squeeze. Thomas Beck's desperate phone call to Margarita, intercepted and recorded by Tyler's surveillance network, revealed exactly what Mark had expected: panic, blame, and a frantic search for escape routes. Neither of his targets understood that Mark had systematically closed every possible exit before beginning his offensive. "They're planning to run," Tyler reported from his computer station as Mark reviewed the latest intelligence. "Mr. Beck wants to liquidate everything and leave the country. Mom's trying to talk him out of it." Mark studied the financial data his team had compiled. Beck's real estate empire was already crumbling as mysterious problems plagued every project. Permits disappeared, investors withdrew, and contractors suddenly found better opportunities elsewhere. What appeared to be bad luck was actually the result of Mark's methodical campaign to isolate and weaken his target. "Where would they go?" Mark asked. Tyler's fingers danced across his keyboard. "Mr. Beck's been researching countries without extradition treaties. Mom's been looking at private flight schedules to the Cayman Islands." "Let them plan," Mark said. "Fear makes people stupid." His secure phone rang. Felix Bates was calling from his surveillance position outside the Whitehead mansion. "Judge Whitehead's on the move," Felix reported. "Packed suitcase, looks panicked. Heading toward the train station." Mark checked his watch. 2 hours since his ultimatum to Beck. The pressure was working faster than he'd anticipated. "Follow him, but don't interfere. I want to see where he's going." Mark walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, looking out at the estate he'd built through years of discipline and strategic thinking. Soon, it would be the only home Tyler had ever known, free from the corruption and betrayal that had poisoned their family. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Please, we can work this out. M." Margarita was reaching out, probably hoping to use their shared history to find mercy. Mark deleted the message without responding. He'd given mercy once before, and it had been repaid with betrayal. That lesson wouldn't be forgotten. "Dad," Tyler called softly. "Grandpa's at Penn Station. Felix says he bought a ticket to Boston." "Good. Let him run. A federal judge fleeing the jurisdiction will make the FBI's job easier." Tyler swiveled in his chair to face his father. "Are you sure this is right? They're family." Mark knelt beside his son's chair, meeting the boy's eyes directly. "Tyler, what's the most important thing I've taught you?" "Actions have consequences," Tyler replied without hesitation. "And what's the second most important thing?" "Protect what matters." Mark nodded. "Your mother and grandfather chose money over family. They would have destroyed us to get what they wanted. Family protects family. It doesn't betray it for profit." Tyler considered this with the seriousness of someone far older than 13. "So we're protecting ourselves by stopping them?" "Exactly." Mark's phone rang. Thomas Beck's name appeared on the caller ID. "You're early," Mark answered. "Still have 18 hours left." "Forget the ultimatum." Beck's voice was raw with desperation. "I need more time. The transfers you want, they're complicated. Multiple jurisdictions, legal requirements." "Not my problem." "Mark, listen to me. Margarita never wanted to hurt Tyler. This got out of hand, but we can fix it. We can make this right." Mark's voice went arctic. "You plotted to steal my money and destroy my son's future. There is no making that right. What if I confess to everything? Take full responsibility, clear Margarita and her father completely?" "You mean lie to protect them?" Mark almost laughed. "Try again." Beck's desperation was palpable through the phone. "There has to be something you want. Everyone wants something. I want you to understand what you are," Mark said quietly. "You're a parasite who thought he could prey on my family. But parasites die when they pick the wrong host." He ended the call and turned to Tyler. "Status report on our insurance policy?" Tyler pulled up a new window on his computer. "Vincent Torres is in position. Mr. Beck doesn't know he's wearing a wire to their meeting tonight." Vincent Torres, the contractor Mark had been running as a double agent for months, was Beck's last hope for salvaging his failing empire. What Beck didn't know was that Torres had been feeding information to Mark while gathering additional evidence of corruption and fraud. "And our federal contact?" Agent Whitman confirmed receipt of all evidence packages. "She says the case is airtight." Mark smiled with genuine satisfaction. Special Agent Sarah Whitman of the FBI's Public Corruption Unit was a thorough professional who appreciated well-documented cases. Mark's evidence packages had given her everything she needed to pursue charges against Judge Whitehead, Thomas Beck, and Margarita. When do they move? Tomorrow morning. Coordinated arrests. Mark nodded. The timing was perfect. By the time his targets realized escape was impossible, they'd already be in federal custody. His phone buzzed with another text, this time from Margarita. Tyler needs his mother. Please don't do this to him. Mark showed the message to his son, who read it without expression. She's still lying, Tyler said simply. She doesn't care about me. She cares about not going to prison. The boy's insight was uncomfortably accurate. Margarita had spent months prioritizing her affair and criminal activities over her son's welfare. Her sudden maternal concern was transparently self-serving. What should I tell her? Mark asked. Tyler thought for a moment. Nothing. She made her choice when she recorded those conversations in your study. She just didn't know I was listening. Mark felt another surge of pride in his son's clarity. The boy understood justice in a way that many adults never learned. As evening approached, Mark's surveillance network reported increasing panic among his targets. Beck was liquidating assets in violation of court orders. Judge Whitehead was attempting to contact former colleagues who might provide protection, and Margarita was researching criminal defense attorneys. All of their efforts were futile. Mark had spent months preparing for this moment, closing every avenue of escape while gathering irrefutable evidence of their crimes. Tomorrow, the trap would snap shut with the precision of a military operation. Dad, Tyler asked as they prepared to leave the study. After tomorrow, will it be over? Mark looked at his son, intelligent, loyal, brave enough to expose his own mother's betrayal when justice demanded it. Tyler deserved better than the family he'd been born into, but he'd found something more valuable, a father who would protect him from any threat, no matter how personal. The arrest will be over, Mark said, but consequences last longer. They'll spend years paying for what they did. Tyler nodded, accepting this reality with remarkable composure. Good. Some things can't be forgiven. Mark couldn't have agreed more. Chapter 6. The net closes. The pre-dawn hours of what Mark privately called Justice Day found him in his study, reviewing final operational details with the calm focus of someone who'd planned countless missions. Through his windows, the estate lay silent under an October sky that promised clear weather for the day ahead. Tyler sat at his computer station, monitoring electronic communications with the dedication of a signals intelligence analyst. The boy had inherited more than Mark's strategic thinking. He developed an almost preternatural ability to anticipate their target's moves. Mr. Beck never came home last night, Tyler reported. His car's at the Harbor Club Marina. GPS shows it's been there since 11 p.m. Mark nodded. Beck was probably sleeping on his yacht, either preparing to run or simply hiding from reality. Either way, the FBI would find him when the time came. What about your mother? Still at Grandpa's house. She was up until 3 a.m. making phone calls to lawyers. Tyler's voice held no emotion when discussing Margarita. The boy had compartmentalized his feelings with efficiency that both impressed and worried Mark. Mark's secure phone buzzed with a message from Agent Whitman. Teams in position. Warrant signed. Proceeding at 0600. 5:58 a.m. Mark poured himself coffee and settled in to watch the culmination of months of careful planning. At exactly 6 o'clock, Tyler's surveillance monitors lit up with activity. Federal agents were simultaneously hitting the Whitehead Mansion, Beck's Marina, and Judge Whitehead's Boston Hotel. Mark had provided precise locations for all targets, ensuring there would be no dramatic chases or escape attempts. They got Grandpa, Tyler announced, watching hotel security footage through a connection Mark preferred not to examine too closely. He didn't even try to run. Judge Carol Whitehead, the commanding presence who'd intimidated attorneys for decades, was arrested in his hotel room wearing a bathrobe and slippers. The man who'd sold justice for profit looked like exactly what he was, a frightened old criminal caught by consequences he'd never expected to face. Mom's not resisting either, Tyler continued. Agent Whitman's reading her rights in the living room. Through Tyler's electronic eyes, Mark watched Margarita's arrest with detached satisfaction. She wore the blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, perhaps hoping it would provide some protection against what was coming. Her tears were real, but Mark felt no sympathy. She'd had every opportunity to choose differently. And Mr. Beck? Tyler switched camera feeds to the marina, where Thomas Beck was being handcuffed on the deck of his 60-foot yacht. The real estate developer who'd once commanded rooms with his charm looked broken, defeated by forces he'd never understood. All three in custody, Mark confirmed as his phone lit up with updates from Agent Whitman's team. No complications. Tyler leaned back in his chair, studying his father's expression. You don't look happy. Mark considered the observation. Happy isn't the right word. Satisfied, maybe. Justice has a different feeling than happiness. Will you miss Mom? The question caught Mark off guard with its directness. Tyler had been asking increasingly sophisticated questions about family, loyalty, and consequences, trying to understand the adult world he'd been forced to navigate. I'll miss who I thought she was, Mark said carefully. But that person was never real. The real Margarita is the one who chose money over family. Tyler nodded, processing this distinction with the analytical mind he'd inherited from his father. So we're not losing family. We're just stopping pretending about people who were never really family. Mark felt a surge of pride and concern. Tyler understood the situation with remarkable clarity, but no 13-year-old should have to develop such sophisticated defenses against betrayal. That's exactly right, Mark confirmed. Family protects family. Everything else is just biology. His phone rang. Agent Whitman was calling with the first official update. All three subjects in custody, she reported. Clean arrests, no incidents. We'll be processing them at Federal Plaza. Evidence package is adequate. More than adequate. Your documentation makes this case prosecutable in any jurisdiction. We're looking at 20 years minimum for the judge, 15 for Beck, and 10 for your wife. Mark absorbed the numbers without emotion. Federal prison sentences were measured in decades, not years. His targets would spend the remainder of their productive lives paying for their betrayal. What about asset forfeiture? Already in motion. Beck's properties are being seized under RICO statutes. The judge's accounts are frozen pending investigation. Your wife's access to any shared assets has been suspended. Mark smiled grimly. Financial destruction would follow criminal conviction, ensuring his enemies could never rebuild what they'd lost. After ending the call, Mark found Tyler watching him with the intense focus that reminded him of military briefings. Dad, what happens now? Now we rebuild, Mark said. Just you and me. No lies, no betrayal, no people who pretend to love us while planning to destroy us. Tyler seemed satisfied with this answer. The boy had always been self-sufficient, but the past weeks had revealed a strength that impressed even Mark. Will they try to make deals? Tell lies about us to reduce their sentences? Mark was struck again by Tyler's strategic thinking. The boy understood that desperate people would say anything to escape consequences. They'll try, Mark confirmed. But we documented everything. Truth has a way of surviving lies when it's properly prepared. By noon, news of the arrests had leaked to local media. The corruption scandal involving a prominent federal judge, a real estate developer, and the wife of a successful businessman became the lead story on every Connecticut news outlet. Mark's phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comment, but he'd anticipated this attention. His prepared statement was brief. I'm cooperating fully with federal authorities and have complete confidence in the justice system. Tyler watched the news coverage with fascination. They're calling it the biggest corruption scandal in state history. Mark nodded. Judge Whitehead's 30-year career had provided numerous opportunities for corruption, and Mark's evidence had exposed decades of sold decisions and perverted justice. Are you proud of what we did? Tyler asked. Mark considered the question seriously. Pride seemed inadequate for what they'd accomplished. They'd faced betrayal with courage, gathered evidence with patience, and pursued justice with absolute commitment. I'm proud of you, Mark said. You had a choice between protecting criminals or protecting justice. You chose correctly. Tyler smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Mark had seen from his son since the birthday party revelation. So did you, Dad. As afternoon turned to evening, Mark and Tyler ordered pizza and watched their enemies' lives collapse on the evening news. Federal prosecutors were already talking about additional charges as investigators uncovered years of criminal activity. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, hearings, and media attention. But tonight, Mark Cooper sat in his study with his son, planning their future with the same careful precision he'd used to destroy their betrayers. Justice had been served. The consequences would last for years. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 months after the arrests, the federal courthouse in Hartford resembled a media circus as the corruption trial of the decade reached its climax. Mark Cooper sat in the gallery, watching his former wife testify against Thomas Beck and her father in a desperate attempt to reduce her own sentence. Beside him, Tyler observed the proceedings with the analytical detachment he'd developed since their family's destruction. Judge Carol Whitehead, once the most respected jurist in Connecticut, now sat at the defendant's table looking decades older than his 71 years. Federal prison jumpsuit had replaced his judicial robes, and the commanding presence that once intimidated attorneys had withered into frightened confusion. Thomas Beck maintained his lawyer's confident facade, but Mark could see the desperation beneath his composed exterior. 6 months of federal detention had stripped away his practiced charm, revealing the weak man underneath. Margarita's testimony was clinical, devastating, and utterly self-serving. She detailed every aspect of the corruption scheme while portraying herself as a manipulated victim rather than an active participant. Her lawyers had crafted a narrative of a woman led astray by powerful men, but the recordings Tyler had made demolished any claim of innocence. Mrs. Cooper, the federal prosecutor continued, "You stated that you were coerced into participating in these activities. But we have recordings of conversations where you initiated contact with Mr. Beck about specific judicial decisions." Margarita's composure cracked slightly. "I was trying to protect my family's interests by betraying your husband and corrupting your father's court." Mark watched his former wife struggle with questions that had no acceptable answers. Her defense strategy required painting herself as a victim while simultaneously providing evidence against her co-conspirators. The contradictions were obvious to everyone in the courtroom. "How's she doing?" Tyler whispered. "Badly," Mark replied quietly. Her lawyers trying to minimize her involvement, but the evidence shows she was central to everything. Tyler nodded, making notes in a legal pad with the thoroughness of someone studying courtroom procedure. The boy had spent months preparing for this trial, understanding that their enemy's final destruction would require his testimony about the recordings. When Tyler was called to testify, he approached the witness stand with calm confidence that impressed the jury. Federal prosecutor Sarah Whitman had prepared him carefully for this moment. "Tyler, can you tell the court how you became aware of conversations between your mother and the defendants?" Tyler's voice was clear and steady. "I noticed Mom was acting strange after Dad's business trips. She was taking secret phone calls and having private meetings. I started paying attention because I was worried about our family." "What did you do?" "I set up recording software on Dad's study computer. Mom was using it for video calls with Mr. Beck when Dad wasn't home." The prosecution played selected recordings, Tyler's young voice providing technical explanations of how he'd captured and preserved evidence of months of criminal conspiracy. His testimony was devastating precisely because it was delivered without emotion, a 13-year-old boy presenting facts about his mother's betrayal with scientific precision. During cross-examination, Thomas Beck's attorney attempted to portray Tyler as a manipulated child, coached by a vengeful father. "Tyler, did your father tell you to make these recordings?" "No, sir. Dad didn't know about them until my birthday party." "Didn't you feel guilty about spying on your mother?" Tyler considered the question with visible seriousness. "I felt guilty about protecting criminals. That's why I told the truth." The exchange highlighted Tyler's moral clarity in a way that devastated the defense. Here was a child who'd chosen justice over family loyalty, truth over comfortable lies. Mark felt overwhelming pride as Tyler concluded his testimony. The boy had faced hostile cross-examination with courage that impressed seasoned attorneys. More importantly, he'd held to his principles despite enormous pressure to protect his mother. As the trial moved toward closing arguments, the evidence against all 3 defendants had become overwhelming. Judge Whitehead faced decades in federal prison for corruption spanning his entire career. Thomas Beck confronted RICO charges that would destroy him financially and personally. Margarita's cooperation had reduced her exposure, but couldn't eliminate it entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor Whitman began her closing argument. "This case is about 3 people who betrayed the public trust for private gain." Judge Whitehead sold justice from the bench. Thomas Beck bought favorable treatment through corruption. Margarita Cooper served as the bridge between them, facilitating years of criminal activity. She gestured toward the evidence table, piled high with documents, recordings, and financial records. "The evidence is overwhelming because the defendants documented their own crimes. They believed they were above consequences, protected by position and privilege. They were wrong. Mark watched the jury's faces as Whitman detailed the scope of the corruption. 12 citizens who trusted the justice system were learning how it had been perverted for profit. The defense attorneys made valiant efforts to minimize their client's culpability, but the evidence was simply too comprehensive. Mark's months of careful documentation had created an unshakable case that no legal maneuvering could overcome. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with guilty verdicts on all major charges. Judge Whitehead faced 25 years for corruption and racketeering. Thomas Beck received 20 years plus asset forfeiture that would leave him financially destroyed. Margarita, despite her cooperation, was sentenced to 12 years for her central role in the conspiracy. As the sentences were read, Mark felt the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully. The people who'd betrayed his family would spend their remaining productive years in federal prison, their reputations destroyed, their assets seized. Tyler watched the proceedings with the same analytical focus he'd shown throughout the trial. When Margarita looked toward the gallery as she was led away in shackles, Tyler met her gaze without expression. The boy who'd once loved his mother unconditionally now saw her as what she'd always been, a criminal who'd chosen money over family. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Mark and Tyler, seeking reactions to the historic sentences. "Mr. Cooper, do you feel vindicated by today's verdicts?" Mark's response was carefully measured. Justice was served. The system worked exactly as it should when criminals are properly investigated and prosecuted. "Tyler, how do you feel about your mother's sentence?" Tyler looked directly into the camera with poise that belied his age. "Actions have consequences. She chose to break the law, and now she's paying the price." As they walked away from the courthouse, Tyler asked the question Mark had been expecting. "Dad, do you think she'll ever understand what she did wrong?" Mark considered his response carefully. Margarita had shown no genuine remorse throughout the trial, focusing entirely on minimizing her punishment rather than acknowledging her crimes. "Understanding requires accepting responsibility," Mark said. "She's still blaming everyone except herself." Tyler nodded, processing this insight with the wisdom he'd developed through hard experience. "So she'll never really understand." "Probably not," Mark agreed. "But understanding isn't required for justice. Consequences work whether criminals accept them or not." That evening, Mark and Tyler had dinner at their favorite restaurant, marking the end of a chapter that had begun with betrayal and ended with complete victory. The boy who'd exposed his mother's crimes now looked forward to a future built on truth rather than lies. "What's next for us?" Tyler asked as they reviewed the day's events. Mark smiled, feeling genuinely optimistic for the first time in years. "Whatever we want. We're free from people who would hurt us for profit. Everything else is possibility." Tyler raised his water glass in a mock toast. "To possibility." Mark clinked glasses with his son, proud of the young man Tyler was becoming. They'd faced betrayal together and emerged stronger, bound by shared principles rather than mere biology. The reckoning was complete. Justice had prevailed. Chapter 8. Consequences. 2 years after the verdicts, Mark Cooper stood in his renovated study, reviewing quarterly reports for Cooper Security Solutions. The business had thrived since the trial, with new clients attracted by Mark's reputation for absolute loyalty and thorough investigations. The man who'd exposed corruption in his own family had become the gold standard for discretion and results. Tyler, now 15, had grown tall and confident, his earlier shyness replaced by quiet strength that reminded Mark of his own development. The boy excelled academically while showing natural talent for the strategic thinking that had become the Cooper family trademark. "Dad, you should see this," Tyler called from his expanded computer station, which now rivaled professional surveillance operations in its sophistication. Mark walked over to find Tyler monitoring news reports about early releases from federal prison. Thomas Beck's name appeared on the screen, along with a recent photograph showing a broken man in his mid-40s who looked decades older. "They let him out?" Mark asked, surprised by the development. "Medical parole," Tyler explained, reading from the official release statement. "Advanced kidney disease, complications from diabetes. He's got maybe 2 years to live." Mark studied the photograph of his former enemy. The confident real estate developer who tried to steal $50 million now appeared frail, defeated by forces beyond revenge or justice. "How do you feel about it?" Tyler asked, watching his father's reaction carefully. Mark considered the question. Satisfied, he said after a moment. Prison didn't just punish him, it broke him completely. He'll die knowing he lost everything because he tried to steal from us. Tyler nodded, understanding the distinction between revenge and justice. What about Mom? Margarita remained in federal prison, her appeals exhausted and her early release prospects minimal. Occasional news reports mentioned her work in the prison library, teaching literacy to other inmates. She'd become a model prisoner, perhaps finally understanding the value of positive contributions. She has 8 years left, Mark said simply. Enough time to think about the choices she made. Tyler had stopped asking about visiting his mother years ago. The boy who'd exposed her crimes had moved beyond anger into indifference, perhaps the cruelest punishment of all for someone who'd once been the center of his world. Mark's phone rang with a call from Felix Bates, who'd become his senior operations manager. Mark, you need to see something. Beck's been trying to contact Tyler through social media. Mark's expression hardened immediately. Show me. Within minutes, Tyler had pulled up a series of messages sent to his various online accounts. Thomas Beck, dying and desperate, was attempting to reach the boy who'd helped destroy his life. Tyler, I know you'll never forgive me, but I need you to understand something about your mother. The messages detailed Margarita's supposed reluctance to participate in the corruption scheme, portraying her as a victim of manipulation rather than an active conspirator. Beck was attempting to rehabilitate her reputation in Tyler's eyes, perhaps hoping for some kind of redemption before his death. He's lying, Tyler said flatly, deleting the messages without reading them completely. I have the recordings. I know exactly what Mom said and did. Mark felt pride in his son's clarity. Tyler had developed immunity to manipulation, understanding that desperate people would say anything to change uncomfortable truths. Should we respond? Tyler asked. No, Mark said firmly. He's dying. Let him die with his lies. The next interruption came from an unexpected source, Agent Sarah Whitman, calling from FBI headquarters. Mark, we have a situation. Judge Whitehead is requesting a meeting with you and Tyler. Mark frowned. The former judge was serving his sentence in a minimum security facility, his health declining rapidly under the stress of imprisonment. What does he want? He claims to have information about additional corruption cases. Says he'll only talk to Tyler. Mark's first instinct was to refuse. Carol Whitehead had forfeited any right to contact his grandson when he'd chosen corruption over family. But Tyler overheard the conversation and surprised his father with his response. I'll meet with him, Tyler said quietly. But only if you're there too. Mark studied his son's expression, seeing determination rather than sentiment. Why? Because I want to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what I think of what he did. He needs to know that his choices destroyed our family. The meeting was arranged at the federal facility where Judge Whitehead was serving his sentence. Mark and Tyler were escorted through multiple security checkpoints to a conference room where the former judge waited under guard supervision. Carol Whitehead had aged dramatically during his imprisonment. The commanding figure who'd once dominated courtrooms now appeared frail, his expensive suits replaced by federal prison uniform. Tyler, he began, his voice shaking with emotion. I know you hate me, but I need you to understand. I understand perfectly, Tyler interrupted, his 15-year-old voice carrying adult authority. You sold justice for money. You corrupted Mom. You would have destroyed Dad's business if I hadn't stopped you. Whitehead's composure cracked. I never meant for it to go so far. The money seemed harmless at first. 25 years of corruption isn't harmless, Tyler said coldly. You betrayed everyone who trusted the legal system. You deserve everything that happened to you. Mark watched his son deliver judgment with the same moral clarity he'd shown during the trial. Tyler had become the family's conscience, immune to manipulation and committed to truth regardless of personal cost. I'm dying, Whitehead whispered. Liver cancer. Maybe 6 months left. Tyler's expression didn't change. So, the simple question hung in the air like an indictment. Tyler felt no sympathy for a man who'd traded justice for profit, regardless of his medical condition. I wanted to apologize. Apologies don't resurrect the justice you killed, Tyler said, standing to leave. They don't restore trust you betrayed. They're just words from someone who got caught. As they left the prison, Mark felt overwhelming pride in Tyler's strength. The boy had faced his grandfather's attempted manipulation without wavering. holding to principles that many adults never developed. "How do you feel?" Mark asked as they drove home. "Finished," Tyler said simply. "He was the last one who could hurt us, and he can't anymore. We won." That evening, Mark and Tyler reviewed the past 2 years over dinner. Their enemies were dead, dying, or imprisoned. Cooper Security Solutions continued to grow. Tyler excelled in advanced placement courses while developing skills that would serve him well in whatever career he chose. "Dad," Tyler said as they finished their meal, "do you ever regret how things turned out?" Mark considered the question carefully. "I regret that people I trusted chose to betray that trust. But I don't regret stopping them." "Me neither," Tyler agreed. "We're better off without people who would hurt us for money." Mark nodded, proud of the young man Tyler was becoming. They'd survived betrayal and emerged stronger, bound by shared principles and mutual respect. The consequences of his enemies' choices would follow them to their graves. Mark Cooper and his son would live free from their corruption, building a future based on truth rather than lies. Justice had been served completely. Chapter 9, Victory. 5 years after the birthday party that changed everything, Mark Cooper stood at his son's high school graduation, watching Tyler deliver the valedictorian speech to a crowd of proud families. At 18, Tyler had grown into a confident young man who combined his father's strategic mind with an unshakable moral core forged through early trials. "Excellence isn't just about achievement," Tyler told his classmates from the podium. "It's about making choices that align with your principles, even when those choices are difficult." Mark smiled, recognizing the philosophy they developed together through years of navigating consequences and rebuilding their lives. Tyler had been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship, planning to study computer science, and eventually join Cooper Security Solutions as a partner rather than simply an heir. The business had evolved far beyond Mark's original vision. What had begun as a private security firm now operated as a comprehensive risk management company, protecting clients from threats both external and internal. Mark's reputation for absolute loyalty and thorough investigation had attracted Fortune 500 corporations, government agencies, and wealthy individuals who needed someone they could trust completely. Tyler's technical expertise had revolutionized their capabilities. The surveillance systems he'd developed as a 13-year-old exposing family corruption had evolved into professional-grade security networks that set industry standards. Father and son had become an unbeatable team, combining strategic thinking with cutting-edge technology. After the graduation ceremony, Mark and Tyler drove to Riverside Park, the same location where Mark had delivered his ultimatum to Thomas Beck 5 years earlier. It had become their tradition to mark significant moments in the place where their enemy had first understood the scope of his defeat. "Any regrets?" Mark asked as they sat on the bench overlooking the Connecticut River. Tyler considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "About exposing Mom and Grandpa? No. They chose corruption over family. We chose justice over comfort. And about the consequences? They earned every day of prison time, every dollar they lost, every relationship they destroyed," Tyler said firmly. "Actions have consequences. That's not our fault. It's just reality." Mark felt deep satisfaction in his son's clarity. Tyler had never wavered in his commitment to truth, even when that commitment required devastating personal sacrifice. Thomas Beck had died 18 months earlier, his kidney disease finally claiming him in a hospice facility. The former real estate developer had spent his final years in poverty, his assets seized, and his reputation destroyed. Mark had felt no satisfaction in his death, merely the closure that came with completed justice. Judge Carol Whitehead had died 6 months after their prison meeting, liver cancer ending a life defined by corruption and betrayal. His judicial legacy was permanently tainted, with multiple cases under review due to his documented pattern of selling favorable decisions. Margarita remained in federal prison, now serving as a paralegal in the facility's legal library. Occasional reports suggested she'd found religion and dedicated herself to helping other inmates with their appeals. Mark felt no animosity toward her transformation. It was simply irrelevant to their lives. "She wrote to me again," Tyler mentioned casually, referring to his mother's periodic attempts at contact. "Same themes. Apologies, regret, hope for reconciliation when she gets out," Tyler summarized. "I didn't respond." Mark nodded approvingly. Margarita had 4 more years of imprisonment ahead of her, and Tyler had made peace with her absence from his life. The woman who'd chosen money over motherhood had forfeited any claim to her son's forgiveness. MIT starts in 3 months, Tyler said, changing the subject to their future plans. I want to develop new encryption protocols for the company while I'm studying. Mark smiled at his son's ambition. Tyler approached challenges with the same methodical determination that had exposed family corruption, viewing obstacles as problems to be solved rather than barriers to be accepted. We'll need expanded capabilities if we take the government contracts Agent Whitman mentioned, Mark agreed. Your encryption work could open doors with agencies that need absolute security. Sarah Whitman had become both a professional contact and something approaching a friend over the years since the corruption trial. The FBI agent appreciated Mark's thoroughness and discretion, occasionally referring cases that required private sector expertise. As evening approached, Mark and Tyler returned home to the estate that had become a fortress of truth and loyalty. The house had been completely renovated after Margarita's arrest, eliminating every trace of the woman who'd betrayed them while creating spaces that reflected their shared values. Tyler's computer laboratory occupied the entire 3rd floor, equipped with surveillance systems and analytical software that rivaled government installations. Mark's study had been expanded to accommodate the growing business, with secure communication systems and evidence storage that met federal standards. Dad, Tyler said as they reviewed the day's business reports, I want you to know something. Mark looked up from the quarterly financial statements that showed continued growth across all business sectors. What's that? I'm proud to be your son. Not because of the money or the business success, but because you taught me that principles matter more than comfort. Mark felt a surge of emotion that he carefully controlled. Tyler had chosen to honor the lessons they'd learned together rather than resenting the harsh realities those lessons had revealed. And I'm proud of the man you've become, Mark replied. You faced betrayal at 13 and chose truth over family loyalty. That took courage most adults never develop. Tyler smiled, the easy, confident expression of someone who'd found his place in the world through principled choices rather than inherited expectations. We make a good team, Tyler said simply. Mark nodded, looking around the study where Tyler had first exposed their family's corruption. The room that had witnessed betrayal and lies now served as the command center for a business built on absolute integrity. Their enemies were dead, imprisoned, or irrelevant. Cooper Security Solutions continued expanding, protected by a reputation for loyalty that attracted clients while intimidating potential threats. Tyler was prepared to inherit and improve upon everything Mark had built, carrying forward principles that would protect them from future betrayal. To the future, Mark said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. To consequences, Tyler replied, clinking his cup against his father's. Mark smiled, satisfied with the young man Tyler had become and the legacy they were building together. They'd survived betrayal by choosing justice over comfort, truth over lies, principles over family loyalty when that loyalty was undeserved. The Cooper name now meant something different than it had 5 years ago. Where it once represented suburban respectability built on hidden corruption, it now stood for uncompromising integrity backed by the capability to defend that integrity against any threat. Mark Cooper had won completely. His enemies had paid the ultimate price for their betrayal, while he and Tyler had emerged stronger, richer, and absolutely secure in their principles. The birthday speech that had begun their victory was now just history, a reminder of what happened when someone tried to steal from the Cooper family. Justice had been served. Consequences had been delivered. And Mark Cooper never forgot, never forgave, and never failed to protect what truly mattered. The victory was total and permanent.